Good day, everybody. It's Andrew here, and welcome back to my channel. We have a huge update today on the next stimulus package, as well as the $1,400 stimulus check for seniors, and the fact that Mitch McConnell is beginning to fold on stimulus. So let's discuss the details in this video, but before we do, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. I also have a second channel, so if you could do me a huge favor, click on the link that's in the description of this video, subscribe to my second channel. I'm going to be giving away a stimulus check on that one, just as a thank you for supporting my work. And on that channel, we do cover stimulus updates as well as updates on Social Security benefits and daily trending news. But we also mix it in with fun things like playing bingo, playing the lottery, playing casino games like slot machines, different things to just kind of have fun and kind of get together as a community on that channel in a little less of a serious way, if that kind of makes sense. But I really appreciate your support. Before we jump into the stimulus update, I quickly want to point out that today, October 19th, is National Pharmacy Technician Day. So shout out to all those technicians who have been on the front lines throughout this pandemic. It's also National Seafood Bisque Day. So let me know in the comments, what is your favorite seafood bisque? Mine personally, of course, is lobster. That tends to be most people's favorite. But let me know if you like seafood bisque and what is your favorite in the comments below. Okay, so for anybody who missed it, Bernie Sanders is trying to include a $1,000 stimulus check in this next stimulus package, specifically for seniors, and usually that extends to SSI and SSDI as well. Then we have some groups pushing to actually increase that to $1,400 to go even further to help seniors throughout this pandemic. So that is currently what Democrats are trying to include in this current stimulus package. Then we have moderates like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema who are making things difficult. And on top of that, we've had Mitch McConnell, who is bringing Republicans together to fully try and prevent Democrats from approving more stimulus and even increasing the debt ceiling, which could potentially cause an economic disaster. Now, we've talked about it in previous videos. The reason Mitch McConnell is doing this is to make it more difficult to approve stimulus. He's trying to force Democrats to increase the debt ceiling by including that in their stimulus package, which, if you've been watching this channel, you already know that negotiations have been so difficult as is. Trying to include the debt ceiling increase in that package would just make things even more difficult. Not to mention the fact that then Republicans could blame Democrats for increasing the debt, as Republicans will have no blame in doing so. So this has been Mitch McConnell's game plan, make things more difficult for Democrats, but he does seem to be folding, and I'll explain why. And a lot of this has to do with the filibuster and the fact that he caved on the debt ceiling showdown. See, Mitch McConnell said over and over, he will not help Democrats increase the debt ceiling, but then when push came to shove, he gave them an additional 2 months, mainly for two reasons. One, no party wants to have a debt ceiling crisis. Neither Republicans or Democrats want to take the blame for allowing the government to default on their payments. Secondly, the filibuster. Democrats were beginning to consider changing the filibuster rules if Mitch McConnell did not help them increase the debt ceiling. And when it comes to changing the filibuster rules, we know that Mitch McConnell does not want this to happen, although he actually has done this for the Republicans. See, when it comes to appointing Supreme Court justices, previously, that could be filibustered, but Mitch McConnell changed those rules to allow Republicans to appoint Supreme Court judge after Supreme Court judge, which is why now we have a very conservative Supreme Court. And see, Mitch McConnell knows that Democrats are considering doing this as well with things like stimulus, so Republicans can't block Democrats from doing more stimulus with a filibuster. Things like the debt ceiling, they could change these rules so a filibuster could not block the debt ceiling increase. See, Mitch McConnell basically does not want to open up a can of worms, at which point Democrats start changing filibuster rules to make things easier for them and more difficult for the Republicans to block them. So basically, Mitch McConnell is kind of hedging his bets, like, hey, I want to block Democrats, but when push comes to shove, I'm going to have to give them some things, otherwise they're going to change the filibuster rules and take everything, if that kind of makes sense. And this was evident when it came to the debt ceiling crisis. A couple of weeks ago, Mitch McConnell kept saying, we're not going to help Democrats, we're not going to allow them to increase the debt ceiling unless they do it in a stimulus package. And then quite frankly, he caved. I mean, he only gave them a 2 months extension, but he caved, and that really shows that when push comes to shove, one, he obviously does not want a debt ceiling crisis to occur, and two, he does not want Democrats to change the filibuster rules. This clip from MSNBC does a really good job of explaining exactly why it seems like Mitch McConnell is caving and why that is a good sign for stimulus. Because no matter how tough Mitch McConnell tries to be, at the end of the day, he does not want the filibuster rule to get changed, and that basically is going to allow Democrats to approve the stimulus package, most likely including the $1,400 stimulus check for seniors, as well as increasing the debt ceiling to avoid a crisis like we could have had a couple of weeks ago. I also want to point out that this clip is harsh on Republicans, and I don't want to make it seem like I'm taking Democrats' side. I never try and take sides when it comes to politics, but this channel is specifically centered around two things: stimulus for seniors and those who are disabled, and increasing Social Security benefits, SSI and SSDI. Now, when it comes to these two topics, it's just the facts. Mitch McConnell has got Republicans against increasing these things, and Democrats are trying to increase stimulus and trying to increase benefits. So for the purposes of this video, it's going to look like we're slamming Republicans, but really it's just because they're in the way of approving stimulus and they're kind of in the way of increasing benefits as well. I don't want to make it seem like I'm strictly slamming Republicans generally. That's not it. It's just when it comes to stimulus, it's just true right now. Democrats are really the only ones that want to increase stimulus and increase benefits. So that's my disclaimer. I'm not trying to take sides politically. It's just when it comes to these topics, it's just really Republicans at the moment are standing in the way of getting this done. So let's quickly watch this clip. It's going to describe why it seems like Mitch McConnell is folding and why that is a good sign for stimulus and a good sign for Social Security benefits.
But narratives can be wrong. You know, people in finance said housing prices always go up, a narrative that was largely true until they crashed in 2008. Baseball fans said the Red Sox can't win the World Series. They even called it the curse of the Bambino because, as you probably heard, the Sox hadn't won since 1918. That narrative was cemented. But it was wrong. The Sox did win the series by 2004. Now, what's the point here? Well, even sturdy narratives backed by some evidence can be upended. In D.C., there's a narrative that Republicans are just willing to burn the whole place down if they don't get their way. They really will shut down the government or make America default. That's what the narrative says. And then that kind of belief of economic hostage taking will get rewarded because the D.C. people, the people who write the narrative, believe the narrative that the Republicans won't back down or blink. So somebody has to. Well, why am I talking to you about this tonight? You can add that to the list of broken narratives because up until very recently, Republican leader Mitch McConnell was vowing to oppose raising the debt ceiling. He was telling anyone who would listen in public, and he was saying he would oppose it and not help the Democrats, even if it brought the U.S. government into default.
Let me be crystal clear about this. Republicans are united in opposition to raising the debt ceiling. We will not support legislation that raises the debt limit. They will not get Senate Republicans help with raising the debt limit.
Is that true? Narrative fact check. False. They did get Republican help because McConnell blinked last week. He backed down, which tees up tonight's news. Congress holding these votes, raising the debt ceiling, Democrats getting Republican help on the framework. Now, is this a one-time event? Should D.C. go back to that same narrative? Or is there more to learn here, as McConnell caved? Well, one part of the answer comes down to how the Senate runs. It's not a pure democracy. The reason America even had to ponder potential default is that McConnell routinely leads the GOP in obstructing a majority vote on bills, including even something as important as these debts. Well, Republicans and Democrats have used this, but Republicans do it more, especially lately, abusing the filibuster power to technically delay and stop votes. Now, under these old rules, it takes a supermajority of 60 votes to end the filibuster and get a vote. The default talk, though, was getting so hot that Democrats started mulling, changing those old rules to stop McConnell from abusing the filibuster to prevent the debt vote. Democrats angry about all of it. They say he blinked. And it put McConnell in that bind, especially as his own donors opposed this game of chicken with the economy. Now, Democrats really had an opening here, and this is not a finished story. This may arise again in December because this deal expires then. If Democrats tweak some of those old rules, all for the purpose of keeping the economy going, well, the public reaction is going to range from nonplussed, like, I didn't even hear about it, to supportive, like, yeah, if you owe the bill, then I guess you got to pay for it, and I guess you had to vote on it. And then the third category would be probably Democrats getting some rare support from McConnell's own donors, who I just showed you oppose default. It's hard to think of what voting bloc would actually be upset about this move. It is a popular, clear, even kind of mellow way to cut down on D.C. McConnell obstruction, which many people don't like to begin with. It would also cut into the power of the minority party, which right now is Republican. Someday, presumably, it goes back to Democrat. But think about this. If you go check, recently presidents in both parties have slammed the filibuster and called to end it because they want votes on their own agenda. How often did Trump and Obama agree on anything in Washington? It's a reminder that not everything's about partisanship. Some things are just about old, broken systems and sclerotic leaders, like Mitch McConnell, who defended his obstruction tool, to be clear, against change, whether it was pushed by Trump or Obama.
There's not a single senator in the majority who thinks we ought to change the legislative filibuster. Not one.
Now, political strategist Jake Komanduri notes that while many presidents do want votes on the floor, the filibuster now is more aligned with a GOP that is fundamentally opposed to much federal governing at all. Killing the filibuster hurts one side disproportionately, he says, the side opposed to legislation to solve the nation's problems. Komanduri arguing the GOP has rallied to obstruction politics because its priorities are actually unpopular, a dynamic that actually runs back before the current kind of Trumpified era. He also argues that an examination of when the Democrats had tiptoed towards the filibuster may reveal more about a really stunning gap in the modern political parties and the support they have around America. Go back to 2005, Senate Democrats did threaten to use the filibuster to block a plan to privatize Social Security. President Bush tried selling the plan to the public, betting that he would find public support that would put pressure on those Democrats.
One of the most uttered phrases in Washington, D.C. these days is Social Security reform.
Reforming Social Security will be a priority of my administration. This is going to be hard work to bring people together and to make to convince the Congress to move forward.
President Bush is starting the new year and his second term with an admittedly ambitious goal: reforming Social Security.
For younger workers, the Social Security system has serious problems that will grow worse with time.
That was the argument. Those were the days. The effort failed, all amidst a reported general anxiety attack in the Republican center over Social Security, driving headlines so bad there really wasn't public support and there was never a vote. In other words, Democrats didn't need to exercise that filibuster threat. By contrast, we've been living through weeks of coverage of these popular items blocked from an up or down vote. And so let me tell you this. There's a tendency when you have these kind of stories to kind of just go right through them. Okay, we raised the debt ceiling, so let's move on, right? It's certainly not the most fun thing to talk about in the news, let alone in your real life. But it's all related. Did the Democrats just live through, this week going into tonight's vote, an example where you could actually see the blinking and actually beat the narrative and actually change the rules to have, OMG, it's possible, a democracy on the Senate floor?
The whole thing really is a very well-oiled machine, with the filibuster serving as a Death Star to destroy progressive legislation. And keep in mind, by the way, that Luke Skywalker, he blew up the Death Star. He didn't say, hey, let's keep this thing around in case the Rebel Alliance might need it one day. No, he blew it up. Because when you are trying to defeat an enemy or defeat an opposition, which is what the Democrats are trying to do, you destroy and take away their biggest weapon, which is the filibuster.
Any Star Wars fan would react, though, with the follow-up, what if it's a trap? Star Wars reference.
Well,
Star Wars. No, you know what? I'm not really even asking that question. I just wanted to get, what was that character? The guy with the...
Admiral Akbar.
Shout out to Admiral Akbar. No, I don't actually think it's a trap, but I do want you to build on your point about what is revealed, because We had a former Schumer staffer mention this on our air. The president mentioned it, and then other people have mentioned it. So it started to percolate. It's funny. Sometimes it feels like nothing's happening. And then in the span of, as far as I could tell from the newsroom, a day to 3 days, somewhere in there, it was like, wait, maybe this will be the thing that starts opening the door to changing this obstruction filibuster rule. And as we just walked through, McConnell's own big spenders would be for it. The Democratic Party's for it, and everyone else who's not a Senate nerd like us wouldn't even hear about it. So do you think that there's something here that some of the Democrats who used to work for have this congealing and setting in and going, wow, this is what it looks like when McConnell blinks?
Exactly. And if you want to talk about a trap, McConnell kind of fell right into it. What you really saw in this recent episode is how Trump and McConnell work for different masters. Mitch McConnell works for corporate interests. He has taken more money from corporate interests than any other senator in the last cycle, and that has been true for multiple cycles. He works for corporate interests. That's who he cares about. Corporations, by the way, love the filibuster. It protects them from progressive legislation, and they pay Mitch McConnell as a form of protection money against this progressive legislation. Donald Trump only works for himself. The only bank account he cares about is Donald Trump's bank account. Now, the corporations did not want a global economic meltdown, obviously. Donald Trump, however, wanted some chaos that made Joe Biden look bad. So Mitch McConnell played it cute. He was hoping Democrats wouldn't blink. It didn't turn out the way he wanted. So he decided to blink. He's the one who reversed himself on this, because at the end, he works for the corporations, not for Donald.